And therefore we must act as we can against them, and also what is necessary for securing ourselves, religion, and liberty without them. We would think nobles ennobled with virtue a great mercy and encouragement. And if they would concur in the testimony for religion and liberty, we would be glad that they should lead the van and prove themselves to be powers appointed by God in acting for Him in His interest. But for the want of their conduct we must not surcease from that duty that they abandon, nor think that the concurrence of peers is so necessary to legitimate our actions as that without that formality, our resolutions to maintain the truth of God on all hazards in a private capacity were unlawful in the court of God and nature, but, on the contrary, must judge that their relinquishing or opposing their duty, which before God they are obliged to maintain, preserve, and promote, is so far from loosing our obligation or esteeming us from our duty, that it should rather press us to prosecute it with the more vigor, without suspending it upon their precedency. For now they can pretend to no precedency, for when they do not answer the end of their own private advantage, they cease to be the ministers of God and of the people, and become private persons. And reason will conclude, quote, that when the euphorii or trustees betray their trust, and sell or basely give away the liberties and privileges of the people which they were entrusted with, the people cannot be brought into a remediless condition. If a tutor waste and destroy the pupil's estate, the law provides a remedy for the pupil. Jus Populi, Vind. Cap 15, pages 335 and 336, unquote. Quote, the remedy in this case can only be, as everyone must move in his own sphere, while all concur in the same duty. So if any, in higher place, become not only remiss, but according to the influence of their power would seduce others into their apostasy, it is their duty to resist and endeavor their reformation or removal. And if these more eminently entrusted should turn directly apostates, and obstructive and destructive to common interests, the people of an inferior degree may step forward to occupy the places and assert the interests which they forfought and deserved. Neither is this a breach of good order, for order is only a means subordinate to and intended for the glory of God and the people's good, and the regulation thereof must only be admitted as it is conducible and not repugnant to these ends. A general's command to his soldiers in battle does not impede the necessity of succession in case of vacancy of any charge, either through death or desertion, even of such as is in quality may be far inferior to those whose places they step into. Naphtali, page 151, first edition, unquote. I do not assert this for private peoples aspiring into the capacity of primores of peers, but that they may do that which the peers desert and dare not, or will not do if the Lord put them in a capacity to do it. And more plainly I assert that if the peers of the land, whose duty it is principally to restrain and repress tyranny, either connive at it or concur with it, and so abandon or betray their trust, then the common people may do it, at least are obliged to renounce, reject, and disown allegiance to the tyrant without the peers, for which I offer these reasons. Firstly, because all men have such freedom and liberty by nature as peers have, being no more slaves than they, because slavery is a penal evil contrary to nature, and a misery consequent of sin, and every man created according to God's image is a sacred thing, and also no more subjects to kings, etc., than they. Freedom being natural to all, except freedom from subjection to parents, which is a moral duty, and most kindly and natural, and subjection of the wife to the husband, etc., but otherwise, as to civil and political subjection, man by nature is born as free as beasts. No lion is born king of lions, nor man born king of men, nor lord of men, nor representative of men, nor rulers of men, either supreme or subordinate, because none by nature can have those things that essentially constitute rulers, the calling of God, nor gifts and qualifications for it, nor the election of the people. Secondly, the original of all that power that the primores or representatives can claim is from the people, not from themselves. From whence derived they their being representatives, but from the people's commission or compact? When, at the first constitution of parliaments or public conventions for affairs of state, necessity put the people, who could not so conveniently meet all, to confer that honor and burden upon the best qualified, and who had chief interest by delegation. Hence, if the people give such a power, they may waive it when perverted, and act without their own empowered servants. Thirdly, the people's power is greater than the power of any delegated or constituted by them. The cause is more than the effect. Parliament men do not represent the people. The people do not represent the Parliament. They are as tutors and curates unto the people, and in effect their servants deputed to oversee their public affairs. Therefore, if their power be less, the people can act without them. Fourthly, it were irrational to imagine the people, committing the administration of their weighty affairs unto them, did denude themselves of all their radical power, or that they can devolve upon them, or they obtain any other power, but what is for the good and advantage of the people. Therefore they have power to act without them, in things which they never resign to them. For they cannot be deprived of that natural aptitude and nature's birthright, given to them by God and nature, to provide the most efficacious and prevalent means for the preservation of their rights and liberties. Fifthly, as the people have had power before they made peers, and have done much without them, so these primores could never do without them. Therefore, in acts of common interest, the peers depend more upon the people than the people do upon them. Sixthly, all these primeval rights that gave rise to societies are equal both to people and peers, whereof the liberty to repress and reject tyranny is a chief one. The people, as well as peers, have a hand in making the king, and other judges also, as is clear from Deuteronomy 17 verse 14, Judges 9 verse 6, 1 Samuel 11 verse 15, and 2 Kings 14 verse 24. Therefore they may unmake them as well as they. To seek to preserve the ends of government when they are overturned is essentially requisite to all societies, and therefore common and competent to all constituents of these societies, superiors or inferiors. The glory of God and security of religion, the end of all Christian government, doth concern all equally. As everyone equally is bound to obey God rather than man, so violence in this case destroys both the commonwealth, and maketh the end and means of government, and the injured person's obligation thereto to cease, and this equally to every man of private and public capacity. In the concern of religion at least, we must not think, because we are not nobles or in authority, that the care of it, or reformation thereof, does nothing pertain to us. Nay, in that, in carrying on the work thereof, there is inequality. As in the erection of the Old Testament tabernacle, all the people were to contribute alike half a shekel, Exodus 30, that it might be for a remembrance unto the Lord. Hence it follows, if we disown the supreme ruler and the inferior confederate with him, and cannot have the concurrence of others, quote, now through the manifest and notorious perversion of the great ends of society and government, the bond thereof being dissolved, we liberate therefrom, do relapse into our primeval liberty and privilege, and accordingly as the similitude of our case and exigence of our cause doth require, may, upon the very same principles, again join and associate for our better defense and preservation, as we did at first enter into societies, unquote. Naphtali, page 150. Yet, whatever we may do in this case, we are not for presumptuous assumptions of authority, which malversers have forefaulted. Neither are we for new erections of government, but are for keeping the society of which we are members, entire in an endeavor to have all our fellow members united unto God and to one another in religion and liberty, according to the bond of the solemn league and covenant. Certainly it is that greater societies under one government may in some cases make a secession and divide into lesser without sedition. Or else, how would there be so many distinct commonwealths in the world, seeing at first all was under one head? And how comes it to pass that there are so many kingdoms in Europe, when it can be instanced when all or the most part were under one Roman emperor? But this, in our circumstance, is no way expedient, neither was it ever in projection. But our aim is to abstract ourselves inoffensively, and maintain our rights that remain unrobbed, and to adhere closely to the fundamental constitutions, laws, and laudable practices of our native kingdom. 11thly, we own the obligation of our sacred covenants, unrepealably and indispensably binding to all the duties of Christian subjection to magistrates. But we deny that hereby we are bound either to maintain monarchy, especially thus perverted, nor to own the authority of either of the two monarchs that have monarchized or tyrannized over us these 27 years past. For as to the first, we assert that that which is in its own nature mutable cannot be simply sworn unto to be maintained and preserved, but hypothetically at most, else it were simply sinful, since it were to make things in their own nature and in the providence of God unchangeable. Yea, it were a downright swearing not to comply with, but to spurn against, the various vicissitudes of divine providence, the great rector of the universe. And it is unquestionable that when these alterable and unalterable are put in the same oath, to make the engagement lawful, the things must be understood as they are in their own nature, and no otherwise. Else both the imposer and the taker grievously transgress, the former, in taking upon him what is in the power of no mortal, and a contradiction to the prerogative of the immortal God, and the other in owning that power as just. Hence, when these two fall to be in the same oath, they must be so understood as it may not be made a snare to the conscience of the swearer, for it may fall so out in the providence of God that the preservation of both is in all respects made impossible, and an adhesion to the one may so far interfere with the preservation of the other, as if the mutable, and that which hath no objective obligation to be stuck to the other, which with the loss of all interests we are to maintain, must be abandoned. Yea, that which was sworn to be maintained as a mean only, and a mutable one too, may not only cease to be a mean, but actually destroy the main end, and then it is to be laid aside, because then it inverts the order of things. Hence also it may be questioned if it were not more convenient to leave out those things that are alterable in themselves out of the same oath with things unalterable, and put them in a distinct oath or covenant by themselves, as we see Jehoiada did in 2 Kings 11, verse 17. Quote, He made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people, between the king also and the people. Unquote. Here are two distinct covenants, the one made with God about things eternally obligatory, wherein the king and the people engage themselves upon level ground to serve the Lord, and Joash the king, his treacherous dealing with God in that manner, brought the curse of that covenant upon him. The other covenant was civil, about things alterable, relating to points of government and subjection, and as he, by virtue of that prior covenant, had obliged himself under the pain of the curse thereof, to carry as one covenanted to God with the people, and so not to tyrannize over his brethren, so the people, by virtue of that same covenant, were to yield obedience, but in nothing to acknowledge him as having power or authority to countermand God's command. Neither had it been an act of disloyalty to have broken down his groves, which he had, with the addition of the guilt of perjury, set up, and to have bound his ungrateful hands from the blood of the gracious Zechariah, a perfect parallel to our case under the former dominator, save that it was outdone as to all dimensions of wickedness by him. To speak more plainly, the religious part of our covenant is of an eternal obligation. But as to the civil part, it is impossible it can ever be so, unless it be well and cautiously understood. That is, unless, instead of any species of government as monarchy, etc., we put in magistracy itself. For this is that power which is of God, but monarchy, etc., is only a human creature. About the creation thereof men take a liberty according to what suits them best in their present circumstances. And as to this species of monarchy, men are never left at liberty to clothe them therewith any inept or impious person.